taking a deep breath could be killing you. Every day we breathe in air filled with pollution, tiny invisible particles that inflame our lungs, trigger asthma, and make allergies unbearable. For those with respiratory issues, stepping outside isn't just uncomfortable, it's a health risk. And it's getting worse. Air pollution contributes to over 7 million deaths every single year. And that doesn't include intense allergies and other ailments. These are not just stats. Millions of people are struggling with something as basic as breathing. Ever walked down the street in summer and felt like you were melting into the pavement? Yeah, that's urban heat island effect. And it's making heat waves more dangerous, energy bills are higher, and life in the city is way less comfortable. Cities are basically giant ovens, trapping heat in concrete and asphalt, making them up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit or 3 degrees Celsius hotter than surrounding areas. But what if we could cool things down and clean up the air at the same time? And without massive infrastructure projects or billion-dollar budgets that will completely overhaul cities. And that's where today's guest, Auke from Respyre, comes in. And he's bringing a little friend named Moss. That's right, Moss. This little green powerhouse absorbs pollution, lowers temperatures, and thrives on concrete, acting like a natural air filter. Moss can reduce airborne particles up to 20%, helping people breathe a little easier. Auke formed Respyre, a company using self-sustaining moss to turn concrete jungles into actual breathable spaces. Could this be the future of cooler cities? Is moss really the key to improving air quality on a larger scale? And just how practical is it to implement this technology in a variety of urban and rural environments? Let's find out. Welcome to the GoodViral podcast, and thank you for joining the conversation.
Yeah, it's great to have you, Auke, with us today. First question is, because your organization, it's a little bit different than I think what a lot of people really understand. I have what I would say is only a basic idea of what it is that you really do. So that's kind of the first thing, is to explain, how the idea came about for your company, and what is really what you guys do.
I think the biggest most important part to start with is the where Respyre, where the word and where the whole mission came from. And it's quite easy, because Respyre stands for respiration, which means breathing. And it becomes more and more clear that our cities have forgotten to breathe. And the biggest reason for this is the usage of stones and glass and asphalt and concrete, which have proven to be very efficient. Don't get me wrong, in the 60s, the great buildup, we needed this. We needed to build very quickly. But Valencia recently is a great example of why we shouldn't always be building our cities with stone and concrete. So that's what we believe in. We think our cities have forgotten to breathe, and we're here to make cities breathe again through the incorporation of nature in the urban environment. Then it's like, okay, yeah, then why are we living in stone concrete jungles, right? Why isn't it already as green as it can? And we see that the biggest reason for this is that urban greenery is still perceived as like a big hassle, a lot of maintenance, a lot of costs associated with making stuff green. And therefore the default option is always brick and mortar, glass, or whatever hard material you can think of. And what I really believe in is, if you take this dinosaur industry and you create green solutions that are so efficient, so the solutions that speak the same language as the construction world already does, which is money and efficiency, then I feel like it might be an opportunity to replace these dinosaur default options by green, nature inclusive options. And that's really what Respyre is all about. And our first innovation that we're doing this with is called Moss Concrete, which actually was an adventure originally at the TU Delft, where I was a student throughout my bachelor's. And we took this and we're like, well, this is it. Let's go. That was 3 years ago. And now we're finally in the commercial phase, scaling up.
Yeah, that's amazing. And, I found you guys from social media, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about social media is that it can really get you a nice glimpse of amazing things that are happening in the world. And like you said, you've been in operation for about 3 years. So you're just getting started. And I'm really
Yeah.
excited to see you guys grow. And it sounds like you're gaining a lot of attention because, like you said, cities need to breathe. Now, I lived in South Korea for 2 years, and generally South Korea has pretty polluted air, not just because of factories, just because of where they're situated. And people were I was getting sick so much. It was really a pain. And I had to get on allergy medicine and like all of these things that kept building up. And there was nature around, but it would have been better if we were to have more nature. And so what your guys are doing is putting moss on surfaces of buildings, and that creates more air. And I'm like, that's so cool. And it's also beautiful. If anyone's who's listening or watching, go to their social media, check out these pictures. Like, it's just beautiful stuff that they're doing. One thing I saw on your social media, you were at an event and you had this banner, and on there it said 1 square meter of the moss can produce 1 million cube meters of air every single year. And I found that to be pretty amazing. Only 1 square meter does this. And again, I do this every episode. I'm like, I need to visualize this. And so I went to Google and I was like, what does 1 million cube meters look like if I were to look at it? And it was basically like 2 to 3 Eiffel Towers of air. And I was like, that's just 1 square meter. And that's amazing. So if you put that on a whole building, I can imagine how clean the air would be.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we must understand the context. We were invited to go to Monaco to meet the legendary Patrick Blanc and also meet the Prince of Monaco. So we were like, this is our shot, right? We need to stay, true and close to our core and to what we know, but we also need to have, this one sentence that really both, really says what we wanted to say, but also to grab attention. And I think this fact of this 1 square meter, actually, I need to correct it a little bit. It's air filtering. I think the slogan says it filters 1 million cubic meters of air. This is a number that we based on research done actually not so long ago, and you must imagine that you have this square meter, and constantly through airflow, there's air being pushed through like through the leaves of the moss. And what's really interesting about moss is that they don't have roots. The growth that occurs with mosses is all in the leaves, and it creates this really dense leaf package that if you zoom in, it would be like a forest. It's like branches of leaves everywhere, with the great capacity to take out fine dust like PM10, PM2.5, take it out from the air that is blown through the forest canopy, through the moss leaves. And it does this 24/7, right? And I think that's also the beauty of nature inclusive solutions, that when you establish them, obviously it can take some effort, right? Always more than glass, right? But if you establish them, it's a passive air filtering system. It's a passive air cooling system. Like, it will do the work for you. And I think that's the beauty of nature. And if we embrace that more in our cities, maybe first it will feel like an hassle, but eventually we will all be like, thanks tree for providing me with shadow. And thanks moss wall for evaporating some water and cooling it down with 2 degrees. I really believe in this situation where, it's not about us humans, but we will definitely benefit from nature inclusive development. With this is a good example of that.
So you guys, so tell me exactly where you're based and where you're working right now.
Yeah, so we have had some shifts also because we are learning on the go. At the moment, we have our office in Leiden, which is relatively strategically located somewhere in the middle of Holland, between Delft, Rotterdam, and Amsterdam, and also Utrecht, quite in the neighborhood. And because we're quite student heavy, yet it's really a nice place to be in because all the internships, we can just, get interns quite easily and get some scientific research done as well. However, we have 1,500 square meters of greenhouse at the moment where we grow mosses, the mosses that we use in the walls. And if we would have done that in Leiden, then our operating costs of our our running costs would be way too high. So we found this old demolished greenhouse near Aalsmeer, which is like a really typically Dutch village where a lot of greenhouses are. So we have actually 2 locations.
Okay, great. So because what I'm sort of imagining, right, is that if people could go to like a green city, literally a city where they walk down the streets and everything is green. I mean, I see that as being like an international tourist attraction, right? It would be something. And so I know that the long-term vision has to be that, we want people to adopt this idea. We want cities to adopt this idea. But I'm thinking, first stage, is there any place that has really started to catch on to this idea and start to adopt it to where you see different locations that actually have the moss? Has that occurred yet?
Well, the moss, not necessarily. I think what's hard about the construction industry is you need to have a very thoroughly proven technology before you will have mass adoption. So I wouldn't make the argument for our situation yet, of course. I mean, we will get there. But you do see massive adoption of nature inclusive development. You see this trend happening, especially throughout Europe and Asia. You see cities becoming more and more green because it's not just me telling people that, hey, we need to have more nature. It's almost becoming like a general knowledge that the way we build it. Like I said, examples like Valencia really prove that the massive floodings, maybe it could not have been prevented by nature inclusive development, but the consequences of flooding would have been way less if we just had less hard surface and more urban greenery. But to answer your question, you see this happening. I think Holland is a front runner. Utrecht is doing really well. Amsterdam as well. And Singapore obviously is a big front runner on urban greenery as well. And I think what you said, like it will be a tourist attraction. It already is. I mean, what is the most important place of New York? It's Central Park, right? I mean, well, maybe people would argue differently, but it's one of the most well-known places. In Amsterdam, you have Vondelpark, right? I mean, already the pieces of nature within the cities are where the people go. If you go for a stroll, you go into nature. That's just a natural tendency. And I opened one of my pages 3 years ago with why do you have to leave the city to enjoy nature? Like, why isn't it just a shared thing? And I think it should be easily doable.
And, I've been to Singapore as well just this last year. And it was interesting because I was only there for a short time, but it was, I found Singapore to be one of two things. It was either a mall or a garden or both.
Yeah.
And that was really nice. I felt like the air was incredibly clean. I felt very rejuvenated just from the environment there. It was really interesting. And so I can totally just validate what you're saying that, we do go to see all of the nature around us. And, when I think of moss, moss is in so many different climates and different varieties, of course. Yeah. And so, I feel like this technology that you're creating could be adapted into different environments. Is that correct?
That is definitely correct. I think the way we know moss is this moisty little plant at the bottom of the forest canopy. And obviously most of the moss species are found over there. But moss is nature's ultimate pioneer. Whenever a piece of land goes rogue, I don't know if that's the right word, but when it's completely devastated either by over cultivation or maybe a volcano, you will find mosses as the first species to be able to grow there. And that's because they don't have roots. They take up all the nutrition and the water through their leaves. So they just interact with the air. So they're really the bringers of life, actually. And we have species that you can find in the Arctics, but also in deserts, same species, but they are so well adaptable. They're super good at adapting themselves to the environment in which they're placed. So they really make for the best plant, I would say, for effortless or no hassle greenery, because they will do the heavy lifting, right? Maybe a good interception or I said intervention as well is the Faroe Islands. I don't know if you know that, the island group. I've visited there as well because I just love the scenery and literally the whole thought of working together with nature. They literally have houses everywhere with grass on top of the roof, and they just put a goat on top of it to cut the grass, right? And then you remove the goat. It's this is the essence of working with nature. And I think we here in the Western world, we have all these difficult questions that you get whenever you talk about nature inclusive development. And in Faroe Island, they just put a goat on the roof and then it will fix itself. And I mean, that's I don't know, that's great. I think that's great.
Very interesting.
I love that as a business model too, being the roof goat person.
Imagine, yeah. What do you do? Yeah. Put goats on roofs.
Awesome.
So can you help? So for those of our listeners, they popped into this and they haven't seen the pictures. So just to sort of visualize what it is that we're talking about, can you tell us, like, for example, would you see a building that just has a sort of a totally green surface, or what would be, or maybe you could even say multiple buildings or a block of buildings. Can you give us something visual that we can imagine that somebody might actually see when your product is totally built in that area?
Yeah. I think the best example would be grass, but then vertically.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine like a warehouse, which if we think of a warehouse right now, we think of gray and a lot of square meters and just boring stuff. It's the same relatively boring warehouse, but now with grass on the facades, and the grass is moss, obviously, and that looks a little bit different, but it has the same, I would say, aesthetic effect like a piece of grass would have. It grows up until like 2.5 centimeters, maybe a little shorter than grass, and it's just a homogeneous green cover. It is suspect to like spring and autumn. It just does change with the weather. But I would say that the piece of grass would be the best comparison. But then on the wall.
Mm. Mm. Kind of going back to Singapore, when I imagine an industrial area, the one thing I like about Singapore is I think it was something 70% of their city or island is trees. And it's whether it's on the roof or it's in the park or it's inside the building or, it's on the walls. And I kind of imagine that going into an industrial park. I've grew up in a cow town in the middle of the mountains. And so I'm used to seeing industrial side of how we create things as well. And you're right. It is just these big gray buildings that produce a lot of carbon dioxide. And it would be really interesting to see these buildings have a moss wall that could help reduce the carbon dioxide at least. And so I think that's a really cool balance model. And I imagine Singapore, maybe, I don't know if they manufacture anything, if they just buy it all, but I wonder if they would have thought of that. That's a really interesting and cool concept because moss, as you said, is adaptable and generally in most, if not all environments. And so you could put that onto all of these surfaces. So I guess, my question would be, I get that people would be like, oh, we could breathe better. And it's beautiful. And those are amazing points. What's another reason as to why a community or a city or even a person would want to put moss on their walls or their roof?
Yeah, good question. I think this is also something we always struggle with, actually, because at the moment we're raising funds, for example, and the investor just wants to hear what is the business case, right? And I think the pressure that will create this sustainable demand for our product and products that are alike, it's more like this societal pressure that is created by just us becoming more aware of we need to have less grayness and more greenery in our areas. But then eventually the person that pays for us, the project developer, he or she is not really suspect to these pressures other than through regulation. Right? Here in the West, like in Holland, in Belgium, and I believe the bigger part of the western part of Europe, regulation is at the moment the biggest driver where regulatory, like municipalities or governments, they just say like, it's okay that you want to build this warehouse, but by building it, you're removing X amount of square meters of urban greenery. You need to replace that. And then this warehouse builder is like, well, shit, because, that's like a lot of money and also a lot of hassle. And then they might look into ways of doing this in a really efficient and scalable way. And I think that's where moss comes in, our moss, because they can just do their thing. They don't have to alter their design. They don't have to make any complex support systems or whatever, or maintenance contracts, but they can still, answer this demand for the urban greenery that they have to replace whatsoever. So that's maybe the more business wise answer to your question. From a societal perspective, is like moss is not like this Champions League in one thing. It's not like the champion in CO2 capture. I can think of like 10 more efficient ways to capture CO2 than through growing moss. However, moss, the tiny plant, grows, as it grows, it takes up CO2, nitrogen, fine dust. It boosts biodiversity. Actually, a piece of moss the size of a muffin has 300,000 organisms inside. So it does a lot of things relatively on a small scale, but it has this massive impact throughout like multiple disciplines where it can be beneficial. And to concretely answer your question, it provides cooling. So urban areas are like 8 degrees warmer than like rural areas in the same, altitude. Plainly due to the fact that we use concrete there and nature here. And this moss can create natural cooling. That would be a big reason. This then is seen in less air conditioning usage, less water usage, less energy consumption by the same city. And so that's one of the reasons. And
hey everyone, we'll jump back into the conversation with Auke and dive deeper into the incredible ways moss can transform our cities. If today's discussion has sparked your curiosity about how moss can help clean the air and cool our urban spaces, you'll definitely want to check out Respyre's website and social media links. They're in the description below, wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. If you're in the world of architecture, urban sustainability, city planning, or corporate environmental impact, don't miss the chance to connect with Auke. You'll find his contact information in the description as well. And if you're looking for ways to green up your real estate and be part of the solution to the air quality crisis, Respyre might be exactly what you're looking for. Now, let's get back to Auke and find out how we can turn our cities into healthier, cooler, and greener places for everyone.
Like I said, there's a zillion that you can think of.
Yeah, and it's not always about cost, right? I mean, when architects, builders, or just the companies themselves are looking at what they want to have to represent their company, what kind of structure they're willing. I mean, there are always a certain amount of effort towards the appearance and making it look
definitely
special, and so that's so I suppose that's another appeal here is that if they're the only green building on the block and they just look beautiful, they're going to attract attention and they're going to be special. So that has that come into the conversation in your experience with people you've been talking to about this?
Yeah, definitely. So especially the first couple of projects, we got the question, we're the biggest moss wall, right? It's all about ego and stuff. And I think that's fine. But I think if you want to build a company, the first thing you should look for is more sustainable demand drivers. And what you're talking about is a gimmick. The only green building in a block, that is not true anymore whenever a second pops up, right? So your whole value proposition goes to waste. So I agree. This is the thing. It helps us. I know greenwashing is a big thing, and this is definitely the way companies try to do that. Also just through image enhancing efforts and marketing efforts. And I'm okay with that. I do think we found a solution that will have a practical place in the construction world, actually solving problems and regarding costs versus problems that are solved. I think it has a big future, which reaches further than being a gimmick. And I really hope we are more than a gimmick. And I kind of see that now in the response of the market that we are more than a gimmick.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what's something that you and maybe the people that you're working with have when you're working with this moss and you're creating these products? What's an unexpected lesson that you've learned through your work? Something that showed you the problem you're solving and the people you're helping and just kind of changed how you saw the problem from the beginning.
Well, I won't dive into the technicalities, I would say, because we really bumped our head in the technical development. It has been taking 3 years already, and there's still stuff we need to figure out. The biggest reason for that, though, is that this really funny reason is that moss have been used for like feminine hygiene products for a long time. And that was their only usage, I think throughout the 19th century. Therefore, the manly dominated scientific world didn't do any research, perform any research into mosses because, they didn't care. And and so actually, I think you're now talking to like the top maybe 100 moss experts in the world, not because I'm so smart, but because there's so little of them. So that was one thing we found out that, okay, if we want to do this successfully, we will have to do loads of in-house development. And that's actually what we're doing as well. Maybe the biggest surprise was actually the safety mechanism that mosses have to protect themselves from drought and sun. For example, you have this moss called silver moss, and it's called silver moss because it has a silver glow. However, when the moss grows in relatively humid areas, the silver glow is way less intense than whenever it grows up in harsh environments like desert or more arid. I think arid is the word, more desert-like environments. And this is because the silver glow are literally hairs acting as sun protection, right? So this is like, it blew my mind that within one generation of one species, it could change its whole aesthetic, or how do you say it, its presence, just because of the environmental situation being different. So I hope this answers your question sufficiently. Is just the little plant is it's a wonder, actually.
Wow. I mean, I think that would be really cool because I've also lived in desert environments, and to have a wall that's green but also silver would be really cool.
Yeah.
It's just like, look, I got a shiny house. Yeah. I think that's really neat.
So what do you guys realistically see for the near future? Because obviously the long-term future sounds amazing, right? When we start to talk about turning ugly gray cities into beautiful green cities, right? But in the short term, what do you see as some of the next steps that are going to be happening as a result of what you guys are doing?
Yeah, well, I think so. Long term, like you said, Respyre will be pushing out innovative products. Moss concrete is one of them, but I really think we can. Moss concrete has its place in the market, but I think there's place for other products as well. And we really want to be innovative with our development of those products. I think short term, I think, it's back to reality. The reality just is that it's just a money driven market. The way we have designed the real estate market, where we monetized the real estate projects, they become assets before a house or like a big development has been delivered. It already has been sold for 3 times. So we're really in this really monetized commercial market, and therefore money talks. So I think on a short term, 2025, which is also our year plan, we really need to quantify the ecosystem services, which I just portrayed, the cooling, the CO2. We really need to have like really quantified, well-researched, but also well-branded methods of showing what it does and trying to translate that into the language of the market, which sadly but surely is still money. So I think that's hopefully one answer to your question. And secondly, there's also a lot of awareness to still be created. And I know that maybe some people are becoming mad of all the claims and all the push that we do online, but I think we will in 2025 will definitely establish our place there as well, where we've created Greening the Gray, which is an event organization, and this is just to raise awareness. This is just to invite like conventional builders come to the event, get inspired, and if it only changes them 1% towards their thought about nature inclusive development, I think then our job is already done. So to conclude, I think short term, we'll have to speak the language of the market more, really have a good business case to ensure large scale adoption, and keep pushing on the awareness as much as possible.
So I see a lot of things on social media that I follow, architects and other companies that are doing alternatives to help combat climate change or just using cities differently to be more effective. And I always found it interesting. A lot of these architects tend to go to like Dubai and Abu Dhabi and a lot of places where there's money, which makes sense, right? Because they do it more for the ego, as you mentioned, and or because they see the benefit. And then it kind of trickles down from there, right? From what I've historically seen, it's usually the wealthy start something that's a fad, and then it kind of trickles down. So maybe that's what'll happen. But I really do hope that people catch on. Well, even if I just put a moss on the roof of my garage or shed, if you have one, to put it there, and that's a stepping stone, right? And so it doesn't have to be a massive project. It could be to start somewhere small and then to build out. But of course, we want to have our cities to be more green and breathable, especially for those who have allergies like me, or who have children who have breathing issues. I think that's really important. One thing I found interesting in the USA, at least, is that some of the biggest health issues just comes from the bad air. And I'm from the rural mountains, so our air is relatively clean compared to most of the country. And so it's really interesting to hear that. I was like, I don't really understand that. But then living in South Korea for 2 years, I was like, well, I understand that.
Yeah.
And it's terrible. So I think people at times we just don't know how different it could be with one small step that we could do. And sometimes it just takes a little plant. Plus,
on the subject of air, right?
On the subject of air. Sometimes it just takes a small plant to really make a big change. And I'm really inspired by your company, Respyre, and yourself.
Thanks. Yeah.
For creating all of that.
I think you're right. I mean, and Seoul and Chiang Mai and Bangkok, those are the examples we all know. But when my uncle goes like to Swiss for a holiday and he returns to Amsterdam, right, where I live, he's sick. He has asthma for 2 weeks. Right. And Amsterdam is perceived as clean, but the amount of CO2 and fine dust in the air in Amsterdam, and that's air that we breathe in 20,000 times a day. The amount of particles inside that air are twice as high as what the WHO considers to be healthy. Right. So even like, it's not the Chiang Mai problem. They suffer from it because you see it, but don't forget the cities that we already live in. And obviously, the removal of cars, and there's way more initiatives that contribute to a better air. And I think also here, some may be more effective than the inclusion of moss or nature in general. But yeah, I really hope that I'm happy about you also making the claim. I think the awareness should increase. And you're right. Wealthy people have always been working with nature. They have always had a house somewhere in the forest, or, for example, in Europe, the biggest, I don't know if it's the factory or distribution center of Nike, has this great wall, great green wall, and the bigger companies, where the money is around, they are already doing this. And I would say on a local scale, like your neighbor, at least in Holland, they're already spending like lots of money on a little plant here, or some flowers, or some greenery, or grass, remove the tiles and get grass in. So I think on a local scale and on a wealthy scale, the knowledge or the awareness is already there. But just on the mass production of real estate or infrastructure solutions, it's not there. It's just concrete and stones and nothing else.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm thinking that, as you said, inspiration, getting people behind the idea is really the first step. And that's really where, the world is right now, is that obviously it's a long way from being mainstream, right? And the objective is to get it to be mainstream for us to truly have green cities, right? So I want to circle back around one more time then to moss and try to understand, why would you say that that moss is where you guys have landed in terms of other possibilities of greening up a city?
Yeah, so I think this really combines the discussion we've had all together, because if you want to speak the language of the construction industry, which is money or efficiency or scalability, but it's all translated towards money, then your solution needs to speak their language as well, if you want mass adoption or mass adoption, but let's call it mass adoption. And the advantage that moss has is, like I said, it doesn't have roots. So you don't need soil somewhere because it doesn't have roots. So you can literally turn any surface into a substrate without needing a bucket of soil or to remove ground where the roots can go in. So that's one. Secondly, it's not invasive. So what you see with climbing plants is, if you don't take care of them, or if you don't know what you're doing, they will take care of you. They will find every crack that is there, and they will grow into it. And a few springs later, they will burst the crack because they're super strong. And so that's second. Like, moss doesn't need any trimming. So that's also really, this also again translates back into the language of the construction industry, where it's just, we try to get a green solution that feels as easy as paint, or the benefits of greenery for the hassle of brick and mortar, right? And these claims we cannot meet yet. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's nature, it's not paint. But moss is the only plant, in my opinion, and based on my experience now, that comes as close as you can to conventional building material. So that's why we landed on moss.
So you said there's no trimming, so no need for goats.
No need for goats. No need for
checking.
goats. No.
Just catching. Just checking.
I was
Okay.
darn, I was getting really excited about the goats, though.
I was looking at the business model myself.
It's patented, so it's not up to you. No, joking.
There you go. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been such an amazing and informative understanding of just not only climate change issues, but also just living some issues that I wasn't aware of. I honestly didn't think about breathing 20,000 times a day. It's just so natural, and you don't think about it. But yeah, if there's a car running near you, you are breathing that twice as more as if you were going somewhere else. And so that makes more sense that your risk is higher based off of where you live and the amount of pollution, for sure. And so this is such a simple solution to combat some of those issues. And I'm from a red area of the USA in terms of conservative. And so a big issue that they're always talking about with climate stuff is, well, it'd be too much infrastructure to build to combat or to completely change how we do our industrial processes. But what I'm hearing here is that this is actually a very simple solution to combat the CO2 that enters the atmosphere without having to necessarily change so much of the foundation of how they do things, such as manufacturing. You just put in some moss walls, and that will help combat the CO2 that you're doing. So you don't have to completely change your industry. And I think that's something really important to talk about, because we tend to get these stone walls of changing for our climate because we would have to actually change processes, which takes money. And so it'd be less of a cost to put moss on your walls and your roof than it would be to completely change your industry. And so I think that this is really, really cool of what you guys are doing. So I just want to give a big thank you. That was basically a big shout out. So thanks for what you're doing.
I think you covered the essence, is that the mortar that we use, every concrete producer can work with it. Every concrete producer that's already doing 100,000 square meters a year can incorporate our mortar and deliver green walls to their clients, their existing clientele, without changing a thing. There's some aftercare from us. I mean, it won't be exactly the same, but there is no machinery investment needed. There is no whatever needed. Yeah. They can just do whatever they're doing already for hundreds of years. So thanks for that. Actually, you covered the essence of the technology.
That's awesome. So to wrap this up, we are going to share all of your websites and descriptions for those who are listening. Please go into the description and check out their website, check out their social media, do follow them. But what's one place that you would really want to pinpoint people to go to see more about you?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm always reachable. So you send me an email if you really feel like you can contribute something. It's auke@Respyre.com. But I think that's the most efficient way. If you really feel like you can get in touch and you really feel like you can contribute, I think that's the best thing. If you just want to browse on a visual aspect, go to our Instagram. If you want to learn more, go to our LinkedIn. So I think that's the best way. And we've had spontaneous visits from people to our office as well, which was really funny actually. And up until now, it always led to success. So dropping by spontaneously in Leiden might also be a good option, but I think that's not doable for lots of the audience.
Great.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Auke. This is great.
Absolutely. Thanks for inspiring people. I mean, this is, to me, it's sort of obvious that these changes need to happen over time. There has to be not only pioneers in production and in creation, invention like you guys are doing, but also there has to be, pioneers and the people that take that step and say, yeah, we want to do this. We want to have these walls. And so any publicity that our listeners can do in terms of talking about it, sharing, communicating with you all, inspiring other people to take on the ideas, all of it is a step in the right direction. I think it's pretty hard to disagree with beauty and clean air, right? So thanks so much for joining us today then. And you certainly have inspired a lot of ideas for me and I'm sure for a lot of our listeners.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the GoodViral podcast and being part of the conversation. If you are inspired by this episode, go to our website at goodviral.org, where you can find resources and listings from the episode to continue good efforts.
Like, comment, and share this episode to any or all of your social media channels. It's really easy to take a small action, and maybe you'll inspire a big result.
When good goes viral, the world gets better.